Well, welcome back to Spencer FYI. I am joined by local author Mary Steele. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.
So, what is your background? Why did you decide to write a book?
Well, it wasn't a conscious decision at the time. Looking back, I have a journalism background, and I worked for newspapers before changing careers completely, and took a job as a director of the Retired and Senior Volunteer Program. Held that position for 28 years, and retired about 5 years ago. But what really prompted me was to start writing again was after my mother died. She got a terminal diagnosis, and my sister and I took her home to die. And at that time, we had no idea that she would just have 32 days left with us. And I didn't journal, unfortunately. Somebody asked me if I was going to journal, and I said, no, I don't want to remember this, but I was wrong. I wish I had journaled. But after she died, I didn't think I was coping very well. Somehow I had it in my head that after a year, that's how long it takes to grieve. And I wasn't getting over it like I thought I should. In fact, I developed anxiety along with the sadness that accompanies a loss like that. So I thought, okay, I need to do something about this. I can't go on like this for years and years. So I started writing letters to my mom after she had died. I think my kids were a little relieved to know that I wasn't actually mailing them. I was just writing them. And the first one was a month after she died, and often it was on the anniversary of her death or her birthday or Mother's Day. And after a while I got to thinking, my kids didn't know my mom as well as I did. They lived here in Spencer, which is where she retired. And my grandkids were very young at the time. They were ranged in age from less than a year to age 9. And so I decided that I wanted to write down more about my mom so that they would remember her. And in my research, I came across a quote that I had never heard before, I wasn't aware of, and that was that a dying person, their greatest fear is not about pain or about dying, but it's of not being remembered. And I think that kind of motivated me to make sure my kids and my grandkids remembered her. And so I spent 10 years on and off writing, and then I thought I had my final draft, showed it to my kids, who are all better writers than I am, and they proofread it and made comments, very helpful suggestions, and then they said, we think you should write it for a larger audience, not just for the family. I was ready to stop at just a manuscript, so I thought about it for a long time. It was really a difficult decision because my mom was a very private person, and the book is very personal for her and for me. And she wasn't around to say, no, I don't want people to know all about my life. And so finally I made peace with it, and that's a whole nother story I won't go into. But I decided that maybe it would help a lot of people. And I hear that a lot from readers' reviews, from people who've written me messages that they related very closely with the story. And most everybody my age has suffered the loss of a parent or a beloved family member. And so I decided she was a nurse. She would be very happy that her life, her story was helping someone.
So what is the book about? I mean, obviously you talked about your mother's life, but what is like the gist of the book?
Well, I'll read the back of the book if that's okay. There's a nice synopsis on the back that my son Aaron helped write. each of my kids was involved. It became a family project. But he wrote this with my help. A daughter tells a true story of her single mother in Rockwell-esque 1950s Wisconsin, struggling against poverty, abandonment, and small-town prejudices to secure a future for her children without losing herself. Breaking the confines of the Midwest to travel the world as a nurse, she finds adventure and romance, but grace eludes her. Only in the joyful spaces between the pain of her son's death and her own multiple cancer diagnoses does she find redemption. Final peace comes under the care of her daughters and surprising happiness and startling secrets as she unburdens herself in her last days. Betty, a memoir, tells of an unconventional woman from a conventional place, unable to rise above life's messiness, but stoically wading through it. It's the story of an equally unconventional love that binds a family together and expresses itself in joy, grief, and shared revelation. So it's not just about death and dying. It's about life and living your best life. During the 32 days we had with her, we laughed, we cried, we reminisced about the past, we planned for the future, we wrote her obituary together, and it really was in many ways a very joyful time. And the book is also about her children, me and my brother and my sister growing up in, as my son calls it, Rockwell-esque Wisconsin, Reedstown, Wisconsin, population 469, and just the things that kept kids busy before video games and all the devices and cell phones that they have today. So there's a lot of nostalgia in there, and I've had readers say that they could remember kick the can and playing tag and hide and seek in the neighbor's backyard. And I think that was something that I identified with besides losing a loved one.
So how long did it take you to complete what you see here?
Well, it probably took, my mother's been gone for 12 years, and I started writing the letters for a couple years before I started the book. And that's when I began to gather together some of the letters that she wrote. As a nurse, she always wanted to travel. And so she was able to get a job in Saudi Arabia. And for 11 months that she worked, she got a month off to travel. And she traveled the world, sometimes by herself, sometimes with other nurses. And she wrote us letters from all these exotic places that I've never been to and will probably never go to. And I had saved those. So I used a lot of those letters in there. And I also used a variety of things. I used hospice notes from those last days. And I used letters that my brother had written to us before he died. And so I tried to mix it up. But after collecting all these things together, it probably took me another maybe 8 years to write it. But I was working full time, and so it's not like I worked every day on it. Then once the kids said, we think you should make it available to the general public, I took about another year revising it for a wider audience.
So it wasn't a snap of the fingers and you had it done then?
No. I'd like to know how long it would have taken me had I known from the start I was going to write a book and if I hadn't been working. But sometimes it just takes a long time. There are some things in the book, I don't want to spoil anything for the reader, but there are some things in the book that have since revealed themselves, and that took time. Just time had to pass. But there are also a couple of issues that I'm still hoping will be resolved so that I can revise the book or write an epilogue to it. And if people have read the book, they know what I'm talking about, I think.
Well, then that kind of leads me to the next question is, are there other books in the works?
We are talking about doing another book. I say we because my husband Steve has been such a big part of my first book that he's also a very good writer. And we decided that maybe we could do a book together, co-author a book. This book would be about everyday things, ranging from just normal things like what was it like raising 3 little kids under the age of 6. My husband was coaching and teaching, gone a lot. I worked part-time for a newspaper, and thought we'd take a different topic every chapter. He'd write a chapter, I'd write a chapter on the same topic without reading the other one to see how our memories might be the same and how they differ. But this book will be lighter. Not that Betty is totally serious, but we think we're hilarious. And when we tell our kids that, they just roll their eyes. But we think we could remember our kids' growing up years with a lot of humor. We just feel like that's something we might like to share.
Well, we have to keep an eye out for that then.
Well, I hope it won't be 10 years.
So the book's been published and it's been out and about. What's happened since you've published it?
Well, that's been really the fun part. I thought the fun part was seeing it finally come off the presses. And it was, don't get me wrong. But since I wrote the book, I have reconnected with a lot of childhood and high school friends that honestly, when they wrote to me and said, I read your book, I remember when we did such and such, I just had to really think hard, really squint. My brain had to squint to remember who they were. And some of those friends we visited since they kind of reintroduced themselves to me. Also, I found family members that I didn't know existed. A first cousin, a woman my age, my parents were separated when I was 4. I never knew really anything about my dad's family. The only picture I have of him is a little black and white out in the ocean, far from the photographer, and my brother is about a year old on his neck. So I really couldn't even see his face. I didn't even know what his face looked. And making a very long story a little shorter, some of those relatives on my dad's side, the McSwain side, sent me pictures of him. For the first time in my life, I was seeing his high school graduation picture and pictures of him in the Army. My mom met him in the Army. She was an Army nurse. And so that's been so much fun to get reacquainted. We've been out to see my cousin Cynthia out in Phoenix a couple of times and have gotten to know her and her brother. And it meant so much to me that there's a chapter devoted to her in the book. So things like that have been really rewarding. In addition, we decided early on that any proceeds from the book would be used for a scholarship, a nursing scholarship in honor of my mom. And so we awarded the first scholarship just a few weeks ago to Alexis Keener, an SHS grad, and she's just delightful. We were just very happy about that. But I think that's one way that Mom's memory will continue long past when we're gone.
Do you have some advice for someone who's maybe got a manuscript laying around or is kind of kicking around some ideas?
Yes. I think about this a lot, that I wish I'd written down more. I wanted every word in this book to be true. And if somebody's thinking about it, just start journaling, start collecting letters that might be part of your memoir. Even if you can only write 2 or 3 sentences a week, it would be nice if I had that to go to instead of my sporadic journal writing. But also you can do it, just start. If you don't know where to start, just start. It will change 100 times. You'll revise and revise and revise, and every time I think it'll get better. But just do it, and it'll all come together. At some point, it almost writes itself. You just know what to do next. So, and I decided to independently publish mine. So mine is published through Amazon, so I don't have an agent. So now it's almost, it could be a full-time job for me just promoting the book, writing Facebook posts. We really haven't done much advertising at this point. It's been more just word of mouth. Has a 5-star review or rating on Amazon, and the reviews are just really nice, and I think that gets a few more readers. I'm asking people who have read the book, pass it on. I never buy a book that I can borrow, so just give it to anybody who will read it. I'm more concerned about people reading it. I think we'll be able to make enough money to sponsor at least one and maybe several scholarships in the future. So that would be my advice. I guess if you've got a publisher, that'd be great. But either way, I expect to do a lot of the footwork yourself after it is published.
Do you want to give us a little tease of the book?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I kind of debated about this because this is the very first page, and I'm afraid that people will think it's sad, but once again, its parts are very poignant and meaningful, but a lot of it is not. The main points are grace and forgiveness and just family relationships. So this chapter is called 32 Days, and then day 1, December 12th, 2008. When the doctor walked into my mom's hospital room, I had a sick feeling he wasn't bringing good news. He didn't trivialize the message that he came to deliver by beginning with small talk. Instead, he got right to the point, telling Mom that endometrial cancer, for which she'd had surgery a few months earlier, was back and had spread throughout her abdomen. There was nothing they could do for her. Mom turned to my sister and me with a look of stunned disbelief and said, "Well, that's a bummer." Not the response you would expect to hear from an 84-year-old woman after hearing a terminal diagnosis, but certainly not an inaccurate one.
So how can folks get the book?
The book is available here at Arts on Grand, where we're filming, and it's also available at various stores in this area and in Southwest Wisconsin, where I grew up. But be sure and stop by here. One thing we're going to do also at Arts on Grand is have a little program with book signing, and that's going to be a week from today on Wednesday, the 28th, from 3:30 to 5:30. So we'd love to have you stop by Arts on Grand, and just stop if you want to hear more from the book. I'll be reading some more and telling more about the story behind the story. And then also the next day, on Thursday, we're going to do something similar at the Ruthven Library. They have a book club, but both of these events are open to the public. So I hope people will stop down and check out Betty.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for taking some time to let us know a little bit about your book, and hopefully folks will stop down here at Arts on Grand to pick it up.
Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome. We'll be back with more FYI right after this.